Have you ever been discarded so brutally, so suddenly, and that the pain didn't just break your heart, it shattered your sense of reality? One day they were close, warm, present, maybe not perfect, but there. And then almost overnight they became cold, distant, unreachable, like a door slammed shut in your face without warning, without explanation, without mercy. If that happened to you, stay with me until the very end, because what you are about to understand may be the one truth that finally frees you from obsessing over why they left the way they did, and helps you stop blaming yourself for a wound you did not create. Because what hurts the most is not always the breakup itself. It is the way it happened. It is the emotional violence of being treated like someone who never mattered. It is the confusion, the emotional whiplash, the way your mind keeps replaying every moment, trying to find the exact second where love turned into distance. You keep asking the same questions over and over. What changed? What did I miss? Why did someone who once seemed to care suddenly become so detached, so hard, so cruel? And the more brutal the discard was, the more your mind wants to believe one devastating lie, that none of it was real, that they never cared, that you were just a phase, just an option, just someone easy to walk away from. But that is where most people get trapped. They judge the depth of someone's feelings by the softness of their exit. They assume that if someone cared deeply, they would leave gently, they would explain, they would show emotion, they would struggle in front of you. But human psychology does not work that neatly, especially not when someone is deeply avoidant, especially not when closeness activates fear instead of safety. Because the truth is, some people do not become cold because they feel nothing. They become cold because they feel too much and they do not know how to survive it. That is the part no one tells you when your heart is on the floor and your mind is starving for answers. Sometimes the most brutal rejection does not come from lack of feeling. Sometimes it comes from emotional overload, from inner panic, from a nervous system that experiences intimacy not as comfort, but as danger. And if you do not understand that, you will spend months, maybe years, chasing closure in the wrong direction. You will keep trying to prove your worth to someone whose behavior was never a clean reflection of your value. You will keep reopening the wound every time you think, if I mattered, they would not have left like that. But listen carefully. People do not always destroy what they hate. Sometimes they destroy what exposes them. Sometimes they run from the very thing they secretly cannot control. And this is where the pain becomes deeper than heartbreak. Because when someone discards you brutally, they do not just leave your life, they attack your self-concept. They make you question your beauty, your depth, your lovability, your intuition, your worth. Their exit starts speaking inside your mind long after they are gone. It becomes an inner voice that whispers, you were too much, too emotional, too needy, too available, too easy to leave. And if you are not careful, you will start building your future identity around a moment that was born from their emotional limitation, not your inadequacy. This is why brutal discard hits so hard. It is not just separation, it is humiliation mixed with longing. It is grief mixed with disbelief. It is love mixed with emotional abandonment. And the human brain struggles to process contradictions. When someone who once gave you connection suddenly gives you silence, your mind cannot file it properly. So it keeps looping, it keeps searching, it keeps hoping for one final explanation that will make the pain make sense. But many people never heal because they are addicted to understanding the person who hurt them more than they are committed to protecting the person who was hurt. And maybe that is where you are right now. Maybe your body has moved on, but your mind is still standing at the scene of the crime, still replaying the last message, the last call, the last cold look, still trying to decode how someone could switch so fast, still trying to understand how a person can seem attached one moment and emotionally gone the next. And because the ending was so brutal, your pain feels personal, it feels intentional, it feels like proof that you were easy to erase. But what if the opposite is closer to the truth? What if the reason it was so extreme was because the connection touched something in them they were desperate not to feel? That idea is uncomfortable because your pain wants a simple villain. It wants to believe they were heartless, fake, manipulative, empty. And sometimes, yes, some people are simply careless. Some people are selfish. Some people do use others and leave without remorse. But in many avoidant dynamics, the story is more psychologically disturbing than that. The discard is not always clean indifference. Often it is emotional self-protection in its ugliest form. It is someone trying to escape the weight of intimacy by amputating the source of it. And when people are emotionally underdeveloped, they often choose relief over truth, distance over honesty, numbness over vulnerability. They do not ask, what is the right thing to do? They ask, how do I stop feeling this pressure inside me? That is why the ending can feel so inhuman, because you are looking at it through the lens of love, while they are acting through the lens of emotional survival. You wanted understanding. They wanted escape. You wanted repair. They wanted relief. You wanted clarity. They wanted control. And once you see that, something begins to shift. Not because it makes what they did okay. It does not. Brutal discard still wounds. Silence still cuts. Emotional abandonment still leaves scars. But when you begin to understand the psychology behind the behavior, the pain starts losing its power to define your worth. And that is where your healing begins. Not when they come back. Not when they apologize. Not when they finally explain themselves in the perfect way you have imagined 100 times. But when you stop reading their brutality as proof that you were not enough. Because sometimes the harshest exits are not signs that you were insignificant. Sometimes they are signs that the connection hit deeper than the other person was emotionally equipped to handle. And once you truly understand that, you stop begging for answers from the wound. And you start taking your power back from the story that has been keeping you emotionally trapped. If you have ever been broken by someone's coldness, what comes next may change the way you see the entire relationship. Because once you understand how avoidants experience closeness, their silence starts to reveal something very different than what your pain has been telling you. What makes this so painful is that avoidant behavior can look almost unreal when you are on the receiving end of it. It can feel like you were close to someone with a heartbeat one moment and a wall the next. That shift is what confuses people the most. Not just that they pulled away, but how quickly they seemed able to shut off. And if you do not understand the inner mechanics behind that pattern, you will keep interpreting their distance through your own emotional lens. You will keep assuming that because you would never go cold on someone you deeply cared about, they must not have cared either. But this is where psychology becomes important. Because avoidant people often do not respond to intimacy the way emotionally secure people do. They do not experience closeness as peace. They often experience it as pressure. To understand them, you have to understand one brutal truth. Some people learned very early in life that needing others was unsafe. Maybe they were raised around criticism, emotional unpredictability, neglect, or rejection. Maybe every time they felt vulnerable, they were made to feel weak, embarrassed, controlled, or dismissed. So they built a private rule inside themselves without even realizing it. Never depend too much. Never reveal too much. Never let anyone get close enough to hurt you. That rule becomes part of their nervous system. It becomes survival. And when they grow older, they do not just bring that rule into love, they live by it. That means when a relationship begins, avoidance can often seem calm, charming, even deeply interested. In the beginning, closeness still feels manageable because there is space, there is freedom, there is emotional distance disguised as mystery. They can enjoy connection as long as it does not demand too much access to their inner world. But then something changes. The bond deepens. Feelings become real. Emotional expectations become harder to avoid. And what once felt exciting starts to feel dangerous inside them. Not because you did something wrong, but because intimacy begins to activate everything they have spent years trying not to feel. This is where most people misread the situation. They think avoidants leave because the relationship was not meaningful enough. But very often, the opposite is true. The connection becomes too emotionally significant. It starts reaching parts of them they can no longer keep numb. It begins asking for presence, consistency, openness, and emotional responsibility. And if they do not have the internal tools to handle that level of emotional exposure, their system reacts as if it is under threat. That is why they can go from engaged to detached so suddenly. Their heart may still feel something, but their defense system takes over before they can stay present long enough to face it. This is not about intelligence. It is not about how successful they are, how confident they look, or how strong they seem on the outside. A person can be highly functional in life and still be emotionally unequipped in love. They can lead teams, solve problems, manage stress, and still collapse when intimacy asks them to be honest about fear, need, tenderness, or attachment. That is why avoidants often look emotionally powerful from a distance, but become strangely fragile when relationships become real. The deeper the bond, the more their hidden fear rises. And instead of saying, "I'm scared of how much this means to me," they do what their psychology has trained them to do. They withdraw. And this withdrawal is not random. It usually follows a pattern. First, they begin to feel crowded by emotional closeness, even if no one is actually controlling them. Then they start noticing every small thing that gives them a reason to create space. Your affection may suddenly feel like pressure. Your consistency may feel heavy. Your emotional honesty may start to make them uncomfortable. Things they once welcomed now begin to irritate them, not because your love changed, but because their capacity has been reached. Once that happens, they start rewriting the emotional meaning of the relationship in their own mind. They focus on flaws. They magnify distance. They convince themselves something is off. They begin disconnecting internally before they ever say a word externally. That is why their behavior can feel so cruel. Because while you are still standing inside the relationship emotionally, they may already be halfway out psychologically. And instead of communicating what is happening inside them, they often create separation through silence, coldness, mixed signals, or sudden emotional absence. Not because they enjoy hurting people, but because emotional confrontation requires the exact skill they do not have. To sit down and say, "This is becoming too real for me and I do not know how to stay," would require self-awareness, humility, and vulnerability. And for someone wired to avoid emotional exposure, that can feel unbearable. So they choose a strategy that gives them immediate relief: distance. They stop reaching out. They become dry. They delay. They disappear. They act as though the relationship simply lost meaning. But what often happened is far more complex. Their system was flooded. Their emotions became too activated. Their fear of dependency, engulfment, or emotional responsibility became stronger than their ability to remain connected. And instead of working through it, they cut off the source of activation, which in that moment is you. This is why avoidants can appear heartless while secretly being deeply disturbed by what they feel. Their outward behavior says, "I'm done." But internally, many of them are not as free as they look. They just do not process pain in ways that are visible to you. They often suppress it, intellectualize it, distract from it, or bury it under routine, work, ego, or temporary relief. They may look completely unaffected while carrying confusion they cannot name. And because they are disconnected from their own emotional truth, they can make you feel invisible while still being impacted by the bond in ways they will never admit out loud. That does not mean you should romanticize their behavior. It does not mean cruelty is love. It does not mean silence is care. Pain is still pain. Harm is still harm. But if you are trying to understand why the discard was so sharp, so cold, so severe, this is where the answer begins. The brutality often comes from panic, not peace. From emotional incapacity, not emotional emptiness. From someone trying to regain inner control the only way they know how. By shutting the door before the depth of connection forces them to face themselves. And that is what makes avoidant dynamics so psychologically exhausting. You are not just dealing with rejection. You are dealing with a person whose actions are often disconnected from what they actually feel. That contradiction keeps people trapped because your mind keeps looking for logic and behavior that was driven by defense, not clarity. You keep expecting emotional consistency from someone whose inner world is ruled by avoidance. And until you see that clearly, you will keep personalizing their inability as if it were a statement about your value. But the truth is, when someone is emotionally allergic to closeness, your love can become the mirror they most want to escape. Not because it was wrong, not because it was too much, but because it asked them to show up in ways they were never taught how to survive. And for a person who has spent a lifetime running from emotional exposure, being truly seen can feel more terrifying than being alone. And once you understand that, something painful starts to make sense. Their silence was never as simple as your mind wanted it to be. What looked like calm on the outside may have been conflict underneath. What felt like indifference to you may have actually been internal shutdown. And this is where so many people lose themselves after being discarded by someone emotionally unavailable. They keep trying to interpret avoidant behavior using the rules of healthy attachment. They assume distance means certainty. They assume coldness means closure. They assume that if someone walks away without looking back, then they must feel absolutely nothing. But that assumption destroys people because it forces them to carry a false conclusion, that they were easy to forget. That is not always what is happening. Many avoidant people do not process emotional pain in real time. They disconnect first and feel later, sometimes much later. While you are crying, reflecting, trying to make sense of the loss, they may appear completely composed. They may throw themselves into work, routines, distractions, short-term pleasure, new attention, or emotional numbness. And from the outside, it can look like they moved on effortlessly. It can look like your absence changed nothing. That image can break a person if they are not careful. Because the human mind is not only wounded by loss, it is wounded by the idea that the loss meant more to one side than the other. But emotional suppression is not peace. It is postponement. A person who avoids feelings does not magically escape them. They delay them. They bury them under movement, stimulation, pride, and control. And the problem with buried emotion is that it does not disappear. It waits. It lingers in the body, in memory, in sudden loneliness, in moments of stillness, in nights that feel too quiet, in spaces where distraction stops working. Avoidants often look strongest right after they leave because they are running on the adrenaline of escape. They feel relief first, not because the connection meant nothing, but because they have created distance from what was overwhelming them. And that relief can fool both them and you into believing the story is over. But many emotional truths do not arrive at the beginning of separation. They arrive after the noise fades. This is why some people who seem unaffected at first begin to feel the weight much later. Once the emotional pressure is gone, the nervous system calms down enough for reality to return. The bond they ran from starts appearing in memory without the same sense of immediate threat. The warmth, the safety, the attention, the emotional intimacy, all the things that once felt too heavy can start to feel meaningful only after they are gone. But by then, the damage has already been done. And this is one of the cruelest parts of avoidant psychology. They often understand the value of what they had only after they have already destroyed it. That is why their behavior can feel so contradictory. They can leave in a way that makes you feel disposable, then later carry emotional residue they never showed when it mattered. They can act detached while still being deeply affected by your absence in ways they cannot admit, explain, or even fully understand. They may think about you, compare others to you, revisit moments with you, feel the emptiness you used to fill. But because avoidants are often ashamed of emotional dependency, they may never express that openly. Instead of saying, "I miss what we had," they often hide behind pride, silence, or emotional confusion. They would rather feel lost privately than risk vulnerability publicly. And this is the trap you must not fall into, waiting for their delayed awareness as proof of your worth. Because yes, many avoidants do feel it later. Many do realize what they lost once the emotional intensity has passed. Many do look back with regret, curiosity, longing, or unresolved attachment. But your healing cannot depend on whether they eventually understand what they had in you. If you build your peace around the hope that one day they will finally get it, you keep your life emotionally chained to someone who could not honor your heart when it was in their hands. You keep giving them power over your future by making their future realization the thing that validates your pain. And that is where people stay stuck for far too long. They stop living in the present because they are mentally rehearsing a future moment where the avoidant returns with insight, honesty, and emotional depth. They imagine the apology, the confession, the regret, the message that says, "Now I see what you meant to me." And while those fantasies may feel comforting for a while, they can quietly become another form of emotional self-abandonment because your energy stays focused on being recognized by the one who failed to recognize you when it counted. You have to understand something deeper than hope. Just because someone feels your absence does not mean they are capable of loving you well. Just because they miss you does not mean they have changed. Just because they carry unresolved feelings does not mean they have developed the emotional maturity required to protect what they once damaged. Human beings often long for things they still do not know how to keep. They can want closeness and still sabotage it. They can feel attachment and still choose avoidance. They can suffer from the consequences of their own behavior and still repeat it if they have not done the inner work to become different. That is why your healing must move beyond the question, did they care, and into a more powerful one, were they capable? Because those are not the same thing. Someone can care and still be unsafe. Someone can feel strongly and still leave destruction behind them. Someone can think about you every day and still not have the emotional structure to build something healthy with you. And when you finally understand that, your pain begins to transform. Not because it disappears overnight, but because you stop measuring love only by hidden feeling. You start measuring it by emotional responsibility, consistency, courage, and the ability to remain present when connection becomes real. And that changes everything, because now the story is no longer, they left because I was not enough. The story becomes, they left because the relationship required a level of emotional honesty they could not sustain. That shift is not small. It is the beginning of freedom. It is the moment you stop turning their limitations into your identity. It is the moment you stop worshiping the mystery of their behavior and start seeing the truth of what it cost you. And once you see that clearly, you begin to understand that what broke you was not your lack of worth. It was your willingness to keep searching for certainty inside someone who was at war with closeness itself.